I think you will all agree with me that these last few years have been a huge mess. A pandemic, an inflation crisis, another energy crisis, a bunch of wars. There's practically no place in the world where madness has not reared its head. However, some places have been and are being particularly hard hit by this intense trend. This is specifically the case for the Red Sea and its geographical environment. Here on VisualPolitik, we have already told you about the conflict between Israel and Hamas, as well as the new threat of the Houthis to global trade. However, that's not the end of it. Now, analysts are pointing to another potential conflict also around the Red Sea. In this case, I'm talking about a possible conflict in the Horn of Africa. For those of you who do not remember, the Horn of Africa is one of the most convulsive places on the planet. Here we find countries as shambolic as Sudan, Somalia, and Eritrea. And you may be wondering, why might a new conflict break out here? Well, take a look at this news item.
Ethiopia and Somaliland reach agreement over access to ports. Naval and commercial access to Somaliland's coast granted in exchange for recognizing Republic's independence.
And you will say, Somaliland? But wasn't the country called Somalia? Well, this VisualPolitik community is where the problems begin. Somaliland is a region internationally recognized as part of the state of Somalia. However, it declared its independence unilaterally more than 30 years ago. So you can imagine the tension generated by Ethiopia negotiating with a separatist region and not with the Somali state. In practice, it means the recognition of its independence. And what is even worse for Somalia, Somaliland is becoming an important state in the region. Tensions are running high, and many fear that another conflict will break out in the Red Sea. So, here on VisualPolitik, we have asked ourselves a few questions. Why has Ethiopia moved closer to Somaliland? Could this move really start a new war conflict? Today we're going to answer all these questions, but to do so, we have to first take a look back in time. Let's rewind.
The scars of colonialism.
Normally, when we study conflicts on the African continent, we have no choice but to take a look at its history. Many of them have their roots in tensions between various ethnic groups, clans, or families that, as a result of European colonialism, were forced to coexist. This was clearly the case in Somalia. Founded in 1960, the Republic of Somalia emerged from the merger of the British colony of Somaliland and Italian Somalia. However, with a political scenario dominated by alliances between dozens of clans, hundreds of subclans, and thousands of families, the new Somali Republic faced the difficult task of establishing solid and efficient public institutions. In fact, it was not until 1969, with the death of President Ali Sharmak, that Somalia began to gain stability. But taking advantage of his death, General Mohammed Siad Barre staged a coup d'etat and seized power. Siad Barre, a traditional ally of the communist bloc during the Cold War, went down in history for leading military campaigns against Ethiopia over the Ogaden border region. In fact, in 1977, it became Somali territory after the dictator supported Somali guerrilla groups such as the Ogaden National Liberation Front. However, Ethiopia eventually recaptured the territory a year later with the help of the Soviet Union and Cuba, at which point Barre began to move closer to the United States. And VisualPolitik viewers, from that moment on, everything went downhill. After 10 years of fighting against Ethiopia in 1988, Siad Barre signed an agreement with the Ethiopian government to stop supporting the Somali guerrillas of the Ogaden. And do you know what ended up happening? Exactly, the guerrillas rebelled. Civil war broke out in Somalia. Siad Barre was deposed in 1991, and the country descended into chaos. Even the numerous international interventions failed to stabilize the situation. It was just at this time that a guerrilla group, the Somali National Movement, declared Somaliland's independence from the British colonial era borders. Somaliland, despite being riddled with clans, managed to do what Somalia has never been able to do: achieve internal peace. In fact, they soon began to develop documents for the foundation of stable institutions. In 1991, they took a crucial step by publishing the National Transitional Charter, and in 2001, they consolidated their political framework by approving, through a fair referendum, their constitution. In In this way, elections began to be held in a fair manner at the beginning of this century. What's more, this territory also issued its own currency, and internal security became one of its strengths in a particularly turbulent region. Compared to its neighbours, Somaliland became a true oasis of stability. However, despite the efforts of this territory to become the envy of its neighbours for being much more stable, it has one problem. Well, you could say more of a frustration than a problem. No country has recognised it as an independent state, but now everything could change thanks to its agreement with Ethiopia. Check it out.
Ethiopia and the Sea.
On the 1st of January 2024, the Horn of Africa woke up to startling news. Ethiopia had signed an agreement with Somaliland. It was undoubtedly an unexpected, but also a very logical move on the part of the Ethiopian government. You see, Ethiopia lost its direct access to the Red Sea in 1993, after Eritrea became independent. On top of that, with the war they fought between 1998 and 2000, Ethiopia was left definitively landlocked, as relations between the two countries were absolutely destroyed. And although things have improved, no one wants to trust their future to what is known as the African North Korea. The fact is that Ethiopia, aware that 95% of its imports and exports were done by sea, reached an agreement with neighbouring Djibouti to create a corridor that would give it maritime access for the modest price of $1.5 billion annually. However, in October 2023, Ethiopia was met with the following news.
Djibouti, latest nation to reject Ethiopia's Red Sea access plea.
Following the announcement of this news came the moment that the neighbours in the Horn of Africa feared. The Ethiopian Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed Ali, declared that an outlet to the sea belonged to Ethiopia, and that if an agreement was not reached, he would be ready to take it by force. As you can imagine, alarm bells went off, particularly in Eritrea. In fact, Abiy Ahmed has been positioning troops on the border with Eritrea in recent months, 100 miles or 160 kilometers from Asmara, the Eritrean capital, and 45 miles or 72 kilometers from Port Asab, the main Eritrean port. However, perhaps being aware that entering into a war with another country could give wings to separatist movements in regions such as Amhara or Oromia, Abiy Ahmed decided to look for another alternative to gain his longed-for access to the sea. That alternative, as you already know, has been to approach Somaliland. And while Ethiopia had already approached this territory in 1994 to sign agreements on trade, diplomatic and security matters, the agreement they signed on the first day of 2024 has taken a step beyond what they had agreed so far. The agreement not only provides for Ethiopia's access to Somaliland's main port, the part of Berbera, but would also allow it to install its naval forces on the coast of this territory. In return, this self-proclaimed republic would receive a significant stake in one of Ethiopia's most lucrative enterprises.
Ethiopia offers airline stake to Somaliland for sea access.
But undoubtedly, Somaliland's greatest success with this agreement would be the recognition of its status as a fully independent country. Somaliland argues that the agreement implies an implicit recognition by Ethiopia, while Ethiopian authorities clarify that the agreement only stipulates the in-depth study of Somaliland's recognition, not a direct recognition. Be that as it may, this agreement has angered one country in particular, Somalia. It should not be forgotten that Somalia still considers Somaliland as part of its own territory. That is why, following the signing of the agreement, the Somali government denounced it, considering it an attack on its territorial integrity. Since then, tensions have reached such a level that the Somali government has already appealed to the population to prepare for a possible war.
We are ready for a war. Somalia threatens conflict with Ethiopia over breakaway region.
In fact, shortly after the announcement of the agreement, Somali officials met with Eritrean officials to discuss possible military cooperation. So while Ethiopia may have been able to avoid a direct confrontation with Eritrea, it may now come to blows with Somalia. Of course, should war eventually break out between the two countries, it is quite possible that the Red Sea region would ultimately collapse. But we cannot forget that the major powers have many interests in this area. So it is important to ask, is a conflict between Somalia and Ethiopia really likely? Well, let's take a look.
The Red Sea, too big to fall.
In recent months, we have all witnessed what is happening in the Red Sea, a sea that, like its name indicates, is red hot. On the one hand, we must remember that Israel continues its counter-offensive in the Gaza Strip to wipe out the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas, which massacred 1,400 people on Israeli soil on the 7th of October last year. Since then, more than 20,000 people have lost their lives, and unfortunately, while the Israeli army does seem to be slowly dismantling Hamas in the Strip, the end of the conflict is not yet in sight. On the other hand, in mid-January this year, we came across another shocking piece of news.
US and UK launch massive bomb strikes on Houthis in retaliation for Red Sea attacks.
After the Houthis began intensifying their attacks on merchant ships in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and throughout the Red Sea, the US and UK conducted a series of bombing raids to deter the Houthis from continuing their activities. Therefore, it is not risky to say that the international powers are now particularly attentive to everything that is happening around this small sea. Now, the possibility of a new conflict in the Horn of Africa has once again put the whole world on alert. It should not be forgotten that 10% of all world trade passes through the Red Sea, and should a war break out between Somalia and Ethiopia over the Somaliland Agreement, this could be the final straw. In fact, already with the increase in Houthi attacks, cargo container prices have skyrocketed, which of course is driving up prices throughout the supply chain. For this reason, almost every state in the world has taken a stand against Ethiopia's move towards Somaliland. From the United States to China, Egypt and Turkey, including the African Union and the European Union. And it makes sense. All of them have been investing heavily in the area to achieve a specific goal: free commercial transit. For years, the regional powers have wanted to ensure their presence in the Red Sea, the main artery of global trade. For example, Turkey and Qatar managed to reach an agreement with Sudan to restore Suakin Island and its port in the Red Sea in exchange for controlling part of the Red Sea and establishing themselves there. The United Arab Emirates, for its part, certainly enjoys the best position, since although it withdrew its troops from Yemen in 2018, it still has stakes in numerous ports in the country, such as Aden, Hodeida, Socotra Island, and Perim. The Emiratis undoubtedly have the best asset in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. For their part, neither the United States nor China have been left behind in the Red Sea geopolitical game. In fact, both have military bases in the small country of Djibouti, in the Horn of Africa. From there, the United States enjoys a privileged position to secure the transit of its merchant ships against attacks such as those of the Houthis or pirates, and to oversee the Africa Command. But on top of that, the United States has also been investing large amounts of resources, especially in the African Union mission in Somalia, to fight terrorism by Al-Qaeda's ally, Al-Shabaab, and to rebuild public institutions. No wonder then that Uncle Sam has positioned himself against Ethiopia in the face of the possibility of a conflict that would derail all its efforts. In the case of China, although it also maintains its military presence in the Red Sea to fight terrorism and piracy, the main reason for its presence is commercial. Don't forget that 40% of its trade with the European Union, its largest trading partner, by far, passes through the Red Sea. And not only that, this commercial artery is also crucial to its new Silk Road strategy, so it needs maximum stability there to be able to execute its plans. It is therefore not surprising that it has also opposed the Ethiopian movement, which it considers potentially conflictive and contrary to its interests. So, you see, the agreement between Ethiopia and Somaliland may be the beginning of a new conflict in the vicinity of the already troubled Red Sea. The international community seems to have rallied against this, aware that one more conflict in the region may end trade stability worldwide. For the moment, Ethiopia seems to be going ahead, and is doing so with the support of the United Arab Emirates. But in view of all of the commotion created, it remains to be seen whether it will have to recalibrate its options. But at this point, the questions now are for you. Do you think Ethiopia will eventually give in to international pressure? Should the world start recognizing Somaliland as an independent state? You can leave me your answers in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best. See you soon.